During yet another usual night shift, the St. Helena Medical Center, which is located in the middle of the bustling city of New York, was experiencing normal operations. The antiseptic corridors were lighted by bright lights that reflected off of the immaculate flooring. The constant beeping of heart monitors filled the air, mingling along with the measured footfall of the medical professionals. The emergency cases had calmed down, and the personnel resumed their rounds at this hospital, unconscious that something exceptional was about to take place, something that would forever transform the way they regarded medicine and miracles. The night shift at this hospital was generally peaceful. With a familiar mechanical hum, the automated doors of the hospital swung open, forcing the front desk personnel to look up. They had anticipated seeing a patient or a late-night visitor, but the person who entered the building was not a human being. When a huge German shepherd with silky black and tan fur strode through the entrance with an expression of utter purpose, its keen eyes surveyed the hallway as if looking for something. The receptionist and the security personnel exchanged shocked glances as they looked at the dog. A police dog. How did it get in here? A security officer took a few steps forward, ready to assist, but paused. The dog wasn't lost, it wasn't terrified. Instead, it moved with steady confidence, as though it knew precisely where it needed to go. Doctors and nurses paused their work, their curiosity piqued as the German shepherd moved deeper into the hospital's corridors, completely unfazed by the unfamiliar surroundings. None of them knew that this was just the beginning of a series of miraculous events that would leave them questioning everything they thought they knew. In a small room within the neonatal intensive care unit NICU, an unrelenting battle for survival was quietly unfolding. Baby Lucas Sullivan, born prematurely at just 26 weeks, lay motionless inside an incubator surrounded by an intricate web of IV lines, breathing tubes, and monitoring equipment. His delicate skin was nearly translucent, his tiny veins visible beneath the surface. Each frail breath was supported by a specialized ventilator. Yet despite the best medical intervita Bennett, Olivia attended to Lucas. The young child had battled valiantly for days, but the numbers on his heart monitor were lowering, a grim indication across the room. She had spent over a decade caring for infants in this particular unit, but she had never faced a case quite like Lucas. Her heart was heavy with anxiety as she stood next to him. There were no family members present at Lucas' bedside. Only a team of dedicated medical professionals were doing everything they could to hold on to the fragile thread of his life. A difficult conversation was taking place among the doctors, and they were saying, "We've exhausted every option, but his condition keeps declining." Dr. Daniel Carter, the head of neonatology, reviewed the medical charts in silence. He had tried every possible intervention, including medications, intravenous fluids, respiratory support, and temperature regulation. However, nothing seemed to work. Dr. Carter had a sigh. Perhaps it is time to talk about turning off the life support system. The physician was hesitant to speak the words out loud first. The conclusion was one that Olivia was hesitant to accept, so she tightened her fists and gazed down at Lucas, this small warrior who had battled so hard to survive, and he wasn't giving up, so why should they? The cold, mechanical beeping of the machines filled the sterile room, masking the sound of something extraordinary approaching just outside in the hallway. Buddy, the mysterious K9, was drawing closer. The rhythmic sound of footsteps echoed through the pristine hospital floor. Light but deliberate, Buddy, the mysterious K9, was making his way toward the NICU with unwavering purpose. Inside the neonatal unit, nurse Olivia Bennett was reviewing Lucas's vitals when she heard commotion outside. She turned around, and what she saw made her freeze in place. During the brief minute when friends stood at the entrance of a night, the entire room fell silent, and nobody understood what to make of a situation like that. A police kind standing at the entrance of a sterile neonatal unit that was unheard of. Dr. Daniel Carter reacted immediately. "Where did that dog come from? Who let it in here?" His voice was sharp, authoritative. A nurse rushed over, shaking her head. "I don't know, it just walked in on its own." But the strangest part wasn't that Buddy had entered the unit. It was the way he was behaving. Buddy wasn't panicked. He didn't bark, didn't wander aimlessly. Instead, his piercing gaze was locked onto Lucas, as if the Tiny Infant was the only thing that mattered. Security rushed forward ready to remove Buddy, but then Buddy let out a single soft bark, not aggressive, not frightened, just one bark, firm, purposeful. And in that instant Lucas's heart monitor changed. Olivia gasped as she looked at the screen. Lucas's heartbeat. Pete, it's only a coincidence, a nurse muttered. Wouldn't you agree? The infant, who had been fading away, was stabilizing just as Buddy arrived, and every set of eyes moved to the enigmatic K9 to see out what was going on here. Dr. Carter whispered, although there was uncertainty creeping into his voice. However, it was not a coincidence. Olivia was unable to tear her gaze away from her friend. She had spent years working in the neonatal intensive care unit, NICU, but she had never witnessed anything quite like this. How could a dog possibly have an effect on the medical status of a preterm newborn, while Buddy remained motionless? No one in the room dared to speak, and the doctors and nurses could only look at the monitors as Lucas' vitals continued to stabilize in an unexplained way. His unflinching attention was fixed on Lucas, and no one in the room dared to speak. Olivia was propelled by an unshakable feeling, and she turned and raced out of NICU, rushing directly to the hospital's patient records. A weird sensation of recognition came into her consciousness, and she realized that she had seen this dog before someplace. One of the newborn patients was identified as Lucas Sullivan, according to the list. Once Olivia had finished skimming over the facts in an attempt to find information on his family, she became frozen. It was common knowledge that the name of Mark Sullivan, a firefighter with the New York Fire Department, was well known in the hospital. He had been in a coma for 3 weeks while resting in the intensive care unit on the 5th floor of the hospital. Mark was a hero since he was a first responder who had been badly hurt in a building collapse while he was protecting lives. While Olivia continued to go through the paperwork, her pulse was pounding till she reached a certain detail that was really important. She drew in a short intake and felt a chill go down her spine. Buddy wasn't just any dog. He hadn't wandered in by mistake, and he hadn't appeared by coincidence. He had come to locate the son of his former partner at the very moment when the child needed him the most. Mark Sullivan, the partner of the K9 rescue unit, was her friend. The realization caused Olivia to rush back to the NICU, but before she could even speak, a nurse from the intensive care unit burst into the room. Her face was pale with shock, and everyone in the hospital responded with saliva. No one in the hospital could comprehend what was happening. A father and son were separated in different units, both showing signs of recovery at the same time. Standing between them was a Buddy who remained perfectly still, as if he had known this moment was coming all along. No one could explain what was happening in the NICU. Baby Lucas, who was born prematurely at just 26 weeks and had been on the verge of death. Lucas was now stabilizing better than he had ever been before. At the same time, vital signs that had been irregular and starting to fade were suddenly stronger than they had ever been on the 5th level of the hospital before. A. Sullivan, Mark with Lucas's father, having just shown his first signs of consciousness after being in a coma for 4 weeks, it is difficult to believe that this is a coincidence. Dr. Daniel Carter, a man of science and a physician who believed in facts, data, and proven medical theories, struggled to process what he was seeing. He was a man of science and a doctor who believed in science, but what he was seeing defied every medical explanation he had ever known. The K9 seemed to be on a mission that only he felt he could comprehend. Olivia, on the other hand, had no more uncertainties, but he is aware of something that he has always understood, and she muttered that he will never take her without her. After taking his eyes off the dog, an astonishing event occurred for the very first time since he was admitted to the neonatal intensive care unit. Buddy redirected the K9 away from Lucas and dashed out of the neonatal intensive care unit, headed directly toward the intensive care unit where Mark was lying. Olivia, along with a group of nurses, hurried after Buddy because they had a strong sensation in their hearts that informed them that they were approximately to see something. Beyond human understanding inside the ICU, the doctors were in an uproar. Mark Sullivan is showing more movement. A nurse called out he's trying to move his hand. And then just as the doctors were about to check his vitals, Mark Sullivan's eyelids fluttered. At first it was barely noticeable, but then his fingers twitched, his breath grew heavier. A nurse gasped, "Doctor, look, he's waking up." The room held its breath, and then ever so weakly, Mark's lips parted and his voice horror, yet unmistakable for a moment. There was complete stillness in the room, and the nurses looked at one another in a perplexed manner. As they examined his vital signs, their hands were shaking, and no one could understand what was happening. During the very moment when his kid had started to recover from his illness, a guy who had been asleep for 4 weeks suddenly came to. Olivia remained frozen at the entrance, her pulse thumping at the same time. She was certain that this was not a mere coincidence. The hand of Mark shook as he attempted to lift it, and his eyes were still getting used to the light. He looked around, looking for someone. Buddy came forward and gently rested his head on Mark's hospital bed. At that moment, Mark smiled weakly but unmistakably, and he knew that Buddy had found Lucas. More than that, he knew that his son was still alive. St. Helena Medical Center had never seen anything like this before since Mark Sullivan awoke from his 4-week coma. Words spread rapidly through the hospital corridors, but even more astonishing, Lucas's miraculous recovery had occurred at the exact same time his father had opened his eyes, and in the middle of it all, Buddy the loyal canine remained by their side. But not everyone believed in miracles. Hospital Director Thomas Reynolds was a man of strict protocols when he heard that a dog had been inside both the NICU and ICU. He was furious. Ignoring the astonishing report, he stormed toward the NICU, his voice cold and sharp. "What is this chaos? This is a hospital, not a kennel." The medical staff froze. Olivia, who was still standing next to her friend, tightened her fists but made a conscious effort to maintain her composure. The director, Reynolds, invited Noada to take the lead. "I understand your concerns, but what we are witnessing here cannot be ignored." His voice was steady but firm. "This baby is recovering in a way that science cannot yet explain, and his father, the man who had been in a coma for a month, woke up the moment Buddy arrived. This is more than just coincidence." But Reynolds wasn't convinced. "I don't run this hospital based on emotions or supernatural stories." The dog in the neonatal intensive care unit, NICU, is a medical institution that is in violation of every health and safety law. As he turned to Olivia, he issued a straight order to remove that dog from the hospital immediately. No one talked, and the atmosphere in the room was oppressive. Buddy did not move, and he remained near Lucas, standing watch like a silent defender. She bit her lip, and then, driven by an undeniable instinct, she turned and ran out of the room, heading straight for the intensive care unit. She needed proof or something to convince Reynolds, and she knew exactly where to find it. Olivia felt her heart clench. She knew that her friend could not be taken away at this moment, not when something incredible was still unfolding. Olivia ran down the hallway of the hospital, her heart pounding. She couldn't allow Buddy to be taken away, not after everything he had done. She needed to demonstrate that Buddy's presence wasn't just a coincidence, it was necessary. She stopped outside of Mark Sullivan's intensive care unit room. She knew exactly what she was looking for. Next to Mark's hospital bed, there was a small cabinet that contained his personal belongings from the day he was admitted. Olivia quickly searched through the cabinet, and then her fingers brushed against something that caused her breath to pause. It was a letter, and the paper was creased. She gently unfolded it and read the words, and as soon as she did, she realized that this was the documentation she needed to bring back to the neonatal intensive care unit. The handwriting was slightly slanted but still readable. The director, Reynolds, stood strong with his arms crossed, and his look was icy as he scowled at his friend. The atmosphere was fraught with tension. Dr. Carter clenched his hands, knowing that debating with a guy like Reynolds was fruitless. Just then, the doors flew open, and Olivia raced inside while gripping the letter tightly. "I won't say it again, but I will say it again. Remove that dog from the hospital. Director of the Reynolds, it is imperative that you read this before you move forward with your decision." Her voice was shaking, but her eyes were filled with unyielding resolve. Reynolds frowned but took the letter, and the moment his eyes scanned the words, the entire room fell silent. "If anything ever happens to me, remember to take care of Lucas. I don't know where fate will take me, but I do know one thing for certain. My friend will never leave my son's side. If anyone finds this letter, trust that Buddy has a reason to be there, and let him protect Lucas in the same way that he has always protected me." This letter was undeniable proof that Buddy wasn't just any dog. He wasn't just a kind or a former rescue partner. He was something more. He had been Mark's protector in the most dangerous missions. He had been his unwavering shadow in life or math situations. And now, even when Mark had been at his weakest, Buddy had never stopped watching over him. And now that he had found Lucas, he had fulfilled his final duty. Mark Sullivan Reynolds swallowed hard and transferred his gaze to his friend, who continued to watch over Lucas without wavering. As Director Reynolds finished reading the letter, the room was filled with silence, and everyone appeared to be holding their breath. His normally stern expression began to change from one of skepticism and coldness to one of something unexpected. He took a deep breath, and his fingers tightened slightly around the paper. Finally, he looked up at his friend, the loyal kind, who stood firm and unwavering. His steady gaze seemed to say, "I am still on duty," after a long pause. There are some things that science cannot explain, but we cannot ignore what we have seen here. Reynolds breathed and spoke in a voice that was quieter than before. I was shocked, and the entire room froze. Perhaps there are some things that science cannot explain, but we cannot ignore what we have seen here. His tone had lost its customary authority and replaced it with something gentler. Buddy stays. Olivia had a wave of comfort that washed over her at the realization that her friend would remain, but more significantly, that Lucas and Mark would have each other. 1 week later, the miracle continued. Mark Sullivan was making a remarkable recovery. He could now sit up, eat on his own, and most importantly, he could finally meet his son. Meanwhile, Lucas had officially overcome the critical stage, and the doctors were even discussing the possibility of an early discharge. Meanwhile, Mark Sullivan was making a remarkable recovery. The moment that everyone had been waiting for finally arrived with the assistance of the nurses. After carefully wheeling the incubator into Mark's intensive care unit room, Mark reached out with a trembling hand and touched his son for the first time since his birth. Lucas, as if sensing it, stirred slightly, his tiny fingers wrapped around his father's hand. The entire room was filled with emotion. Buddy quietly laid down beside the hospital bed, his tail gently wagging, as if he knew his mission was getting closer to being finished. Mark leaned in closer to the audience. In a low whisper to his kid, he said, "I'm here, Lucas, and Buddy is here as well." This wasn't just a reunion, it was a reconnecting action, and it was a moment that no one in the hospital would ever forget. The baby replied by grasping his father's finger even more tightly. The magnificent image of a family that had been separated for a long time was illuminated by the sunlight that was streaming through the windows of the hospital. Lucas slept soundly in his father's arms, his little chest rising and falling with regular, healthy breaths from the beginning of the night. When Mark Sullivan was first given little hope of waking up, he now held his son close to him, his eyes filled with nothing but love, and right beside them, but Buddy, the loyal canine, watched silently with his tail wagging ever so gently. His mission was almost finished, but as he lay beside them, his tail gently wagging, Buddy knew one thing. Loyalty is not about duty, it is not about orders, it is about love, and love never ends.